Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give it 1 minute to let folks filter in. So just give us a minute. Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a few more seconds to get people in. Okay, welcome, everyone. I think folks have had time to filter in here, so we will get going. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Carolyn Kuski. I'm the founder and executive director of Insurance for Good, and I am delighted to welcome you to our second Ask Me Anything webinar. Thanks so much for being on with us today. For those of you who are new to us, we are a nonprofit that supports communities and the public sector with risk transfer solutions that support their broader social and environmental goals, which are often around recovery and resilience. Before introducing today's speaker or question answerer, I guess, a couple housekeeping notes. Today's webinar is being recorded. We're going to upload it on our YouTube channel for those who weren't able to tune in live. And the idea of these Ask Me Anything sessions is to give folks an opportunity to get their questions answered from leading experts. As such, for these webinars, our speaker does not prepare any remarks. There's no kind of talk or prepared remarks ahead of time. Instead, we're just going to spend the hour sharing your questions with them and getting their responses, their reflections, and their insights. So I'm really excited today that we have Victor Joseph joining us. He is a California resident and the president and chief operating officer at Mercury Insurance. He also serves on its board of directors. Excluding the California Fair Plan, the market of last resort, Mercury is the third largest provider, I think I have that right, of homeowners insurance in California by revenue. It's about a little more than 7% of the homeowners market. Victor's had a long history at the company. He was previously an executive vice president. He's been chief underwriting officer, and his expertise on issues of property insurance, and particularly in California and relating to wildfire, are really vast. So I'm very happy and delighted. We're very lucky to have him with us today. I also think, Victor, that you are actually the original suggester and inspiration for this series. So it's very fitting to have you here, and thank you for such a great idea. I want to say at the top, we had so many questions, and I'm really impressed with the breadth and depth of questions we got for Victor when you all registered. And I'm worried that there were just way too many to get through in an hour, but we're going to try to get through as many as we can. I've grouped some of them by topic so that we can maybe get through more topics. If you have any questions as we go along here, feel free to use the Q&A box. We'll try to insert them if we have time. For any questions we don't get to, we are going to try to figure out how to get answers to you in some way, shape, or form afterwards. So with that kind of background, let's just jump in. Sound good, Victor?
Yeah, let's get started.
All right. So to start, we had a lot of questions about how insurers think about, reflect, consider different types of loss reduction and climate adaptation, resilience investments. So I wanted to start with some of these. I think given Mercury, given your focus in California and the West, a lot of these were not surprisingly about wildfire. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to throw a few at you together because they're all about the kind of collective action aspect of wildfire mitigation when you get into densely built environments. So for folks new to wildfire, when homes are really close together, they can catch each other on fire. And so it really, to kind of bend that loss curve in these denser areas, you kind of have to work as a community, right? And all work together. So with that as background, Victor, here's question one. How can insurers incorporate community level mitigations into policy level pricing? Two, related, how are insurers factoring in the neighborhood level risk since homes catch each other on fire? So, same issue of community and neighborhood. And then, what standards do homeowners need to retrofit or harden to? And how do you evaluate that and the community level investments?
Okay, I'm writing some of this down so I can. There's quite a bit with those questions. Okay, so I guess we'll start with a community one. It's probably helpful for me to zoom out a little bit and talk first about how we come up with pricing in a very general way for wildfire. So I think, and this might be more specific to Mercury. I don't really know how the industry in general does it, but speaking just for Mercury, we use cat models, right? I think that's fairly common. That's straightforward. That's well understood by people who've observed the industry. The use of cat models to help kind of form your initial view of pricing for something like wildfire. On top of that, you begin to layer in other tools or models or sources of data that help you figure out the right pricing levels within different regions within the state. And that's where you start to get closer to the communities. Now, once you get really close to a specific community, we as a company are still at a place where we feel like what you can do with those models and those data sources that you have available to you is pretty good. But when you look at a specific community, there are a lot of things that happen that are very fine or granular, that are kind of hard to pick up on without having a bit more insight into what's actually happening in the community when you think about spacing, when you think about what they're doing with things like fencing, preparation, what's happening locally with fuel management or clearance, local ordinances. Those are things that are a little bit harder to tease out. And when we see communities that have made those kinds of investments, at least for Mercury, the most straightforward mechanism we've had to recognize that is an additional set of discounts that are specific at that community level. So if you have a community that's made some of those investments, they're real, they're verifiable, they're sustainable, and we have a way to validate that over time, then that for us, we have a discount in our rating plan that is community wide. And you can couple that then with the kind of second half of your questions, which was more around the individual properties, where we have a lot of discounts or a lot of things that we look at the individual property level. So we look at both of those things together. So if you're a homeowner and you've done a lot of the right things for your structure and your parcel, your community has done a lot of the right things, then you're in a position to be eligible for discounts off of those initial rates. So you have that initial view from some modeling, some higher level view things, and then you can kind of get things knocked down in terms of discounts from some individual property discounts and then a community discount. They get combined, and you can get, in our eye, it's a pretty substantial reduction, especially when you put those things together.
Thanks, Victor. Okay, building on that, a couple more on this theme. How are insurance companies differentiating between mitigation actions that really meaningfully reduce risk and other actions? And I think this one's kind of related too, so I'm going to throw it in there too, which is what evidence do insurers need to validate risk reduction? And I don't know if that's asking, so maybe you can speak to both of these. If that's asking, how do you know that a measure is going to reduce your claims and so you trust it and you can give it a discount? Or how do you make sure that the homeowner has actually done that thing? Maybe it's both of
Yeah.
those. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. So I think with the first one, unfortunately, at this point in the industry and just generally, I think as a society, we have a lot of experience with wildfires now. It certainly, as we have more of them, we'll learn more. It'll refine our understanding of what matters, what doesn't, as it relates to the likelihood of a home or a community being significantly impacted. But I would argue that we've had enough at this point, and there's been enough research by various bodies in this space to tell us generally what are the things that really matter. And for that reason, we're pretty confident with the discounts we have, identifying some of those things explicitly. We look at the work that many groups do. I mean, we like the IBHS standard. We have other standards that we look at that we think make sense. And we've seen enough fires at this point to have confidence in those things to put behind them some pretty significant discounts. Now, every company is probably going to be a bit different with that. And I know that your team a while back did this analysis where you looked at, in California, I think at least a dozen insurance companies to assess how do they incentivize those kinds of changes people can make to their homes or to their defensible space. And I think your findings were that companies are different, right? I think that's going to continue. But I think over time, there'll be more and more of kind of like a narrowing in on the things that matter most as we get more confidence over time. But I feel like we're at a point where we're pretty confident about some of the things that matter. And there's some really good standards out there, like California's Chapter 7A standard. It's something that's been built over decades of experience. And it's not new. It's almost 20 years old at this point. But if you look at the standards that are in there, those are very, very effective when you look at reducing the likelihood or the severity of a home igniting from a wildfire. So I think we look at those things, we have confidence in them. You can see that reflected in how we rate and how significant the discounts are. That the significance of the discount you could look at as a signal of the confidence that the company has in the impact or the relevance of that feature. And I think you had a second question to that I'm blanking on right now. What was the second half of the question?
Oh, yeah. What evidence is needed to validate risk reduction?
Okay, so for that, so there's different standards you can use here as well. IBHS is a well-known standard. They have a certification process. It's quite rigorous. So I think for a company like us, knowing that someone has that is a pretty good sign in and of itself that it's warranted, that there's enough validation that's happened there that we should be confident about that. Now, at the same time, we've tried to find other ways people can earn discounts, other standards that we can put in front of them that are perhaps a little bit easier to achieve, but we think are still quite meaningful in terms of risk reduction. So for those things, it's just staying in contact with the customer on a more frequent basis. And it might be annual in some cases where we'd like to see what's happening with your defensible space, how are you maintaining things. But there's really not, at least we haven't really felt yet that we can be confident enough in ways that extend beyond just being very direct and very hands-on in terms of having that interaction with our customers because when you're dealing with wildfire, it changes fairly often. You have plants that are cut down, they can grow back fairly quickly. You have to kind of stay on top of it. So if you're going to offer certain incentives, for us, it means there's this additional burden, which we're very happy to take on, of continuing to work with the customer to make sure that things are staying constant over time. And we have to do that with communities as well. If we visit a community and we assess what they've done, it's not like you can go there and you never visit again. You have to stay in touch with them and see how things continue to evolve over time. And it might improve, it might stay the same, it could degrade somewhat. So wildfire is kind of a tricky problem compared to some of the other perils or disasters that we face in that it's very much a living kind of a system that you're dealing with when you think about the risk drivers.
That's great. Thanks, Victor. Okay, kind of last group on this theme, and then maybe we'll shift slightly. We got, unsurprisingly, several questions for more specifics on what Mercury offers by way of these discounts. So do you want to provide any more detail? The questions are, Mercury provides rate reduction on homeowners insurance for which suite of actions? What incentives for resilience is Mercury providing? What standards does Mercury offer discounts for? I think you addressed some of this. Mercury has discounts for meeting the IBHS standard, maybe defensible space you mentioned, several other things. I think actually some of those numbers we pulled from your rate filings and they are up on that link I dropped. But if you want to say any more specifics on what you guys offer.
So I think the easiest thing to do is to go to your website. Although our rate filing, we have a newer rate filing that goes into effect next month that actually steepens things a little bit, so the discounts get more significant. I think there's more of them in our newest rate filing than there were in the one that you had looked at last year. So without getting into too much detail, we use IBHS. That's a great standard. It's a great solution, very effective in our eyes. We have another set of standards that's specific to Mercury, which we had terminology for it that I think IBHS is going to be using. We had like something like essential and enhanced, and I think IBHS is changing their naming terminology to that. So we have a little bit of a quandary now with it being more confusing. But with our standards, I think the easiest way to think about it would probably be most equivalent to something like a Chapter 7A standard that California has, with some additional work on any fencing that is within 5 feet and work on the defensible space. And we don't have, with those discounts, you can earn them without having a completely clear zone zero. You have to have things significantly reduced and you have to have a lot of other things done to the house itself. But there's a path for homeowners to earn what we feel are substantial discounts, but still having some flexibility there. And our hope is that makes it a bit more attainable, but in a way that we feel as a business, we're still confident about providing a 20, 30, even 40% discount if you've done those other things. It's just, but there's a lot to cross off there. So those are the two kind of main sets of standards that we tend to socialize with communities. It's 7A plus a little bit more, or IBHS, great standards. This is going even further, which is fire resistive construction, where you get into things like ICF, which is not for everyone, and you can't really retrofit a home that way. But if your house was built with ICF, then you may be eligible for a much larger discount. We've seen in some areas as they rebuild, some homeowners are opting to pursue that, and that will probably work pretty well over time. Again, you still have to do some other things with your zone zero to maintain it and manage it responsibly. But there are a few different options out there like that. So those are kind of the range of things. You can get anywhere from, I want to say it's around like a 10 to 15% discount all the way up to 60. But 60, and that's off the wildfire premium, just to be clear, not the entire policy premium, because we're talking about a policy that covers many things, not just wildfire. But for homes that have that high exposure to wildfire, that 10 to 60% off wildfire premium is significant because the wildfire premium is a big portion of the overall premium. So we feel that's a pretty substantial incentive. I think we're trying to be quite aggressive on that with the hope that it does make it easier for people as they think about their finances to spend some of that money on retrofitting, seeing some savings on the insurance side. It may not be enough purely from the insurance standpoint, but that's a bigger problem as you get into incentives and you get into motivations and just how we can do more as an insurance company as one participant to help move the needle on this problem.
Yeah, and actually that leads into the next couple questions here. You flagging that you're one participant in this, and wildfire risk management touches so many different communities, public sector, private sector, community, state, the feds. So we got several questions for you on how those partnerships can work or be done better and how communication can be improved. So we'll start with a couple. How can communities most effectively communicate their past or current or planned risk reduction efforts for an insurer to underwrite against? How can local governments and insurance agencies work together better to mitigate and plan for wildfire risk? I think this next one's in that vein too. How can local government practitioners or fire departments help residents with insurance? So these seem to all be about like there's communities, there's fire professionals, there's insurance. How do they become a better team, maybe? That's my interpretation of them. Yeah.
And I think a lot of it just starts with communication. So I know for us, we've had at different times, different communities will reach out to team members at Mercury and say, hey, we're having a hard time with insurance. We've done these things. We'd like to talk with you about it and understand what's happening. Because I think we have seen communities that have made really good investments. I always go to Paradise, I think is probably the most striking example of this. They've made some really impressive investments. They've done really good work. It's not, and there are communities where they feel that they're doing certain things. When you go out and visit them, they're on a good journey, but there's probably a lot more that has to be done. But with Paradise, they were really far on that journey when we went to visit them. And as I said at the beginning of our conversation, when you look at what's out there with some of the models and data sources that we have, at least at Mercury, we feel they don't really pick up some of these things as well as we'd like to. So sometimes there's no substitute for just going out and visiting with a community or meeting with them virtually and just understanding more what's really happening here. What can we see on the ground? What work have you done? Or how are you continuing to do that over time? Because there was every now and then you'll see certain pockets of the state where they'll clear out the fuel or they'll make certain changes, but they'll do it once and they don't really have a plan to sustain it. That's not really something that really clicks with us as well because we're really looking for sustained changes. We'd rather see them do less, but have it be sustainable than do this kind of one shot, hoping that it's going to change everything because after a few seasons, that won't really be the case anymore. So the short answer is we think it's important to interface and interact with communities. We love it when they reach out to us. We try ourselves to do a lot of our own outreach. We've made a lot of investments at Mercury in people and in other areas to just try to do a better job of learning what's really happening out there. We get to meet with the fire service, we get to meet with local government, and we learn a lot through that. And in many cases, we're able to share our view on here's how we look at the risk in the area. And in many cases, we want to go further with that. We'd like to we'd like to talk more about here's how we're looking at things. Do you agree? Do you not agree? And maybe we can learn some things from that. Maybe the community or local government can learn some things about how we look at things and why. And I think through those kinds of discussions, we'll share ideas and we'll get better over time. And that's probably something I would say is a more of a general opportunity because there's a lot of other stakeholders here that look at wildfire, right? You have the fire service in the communities like we just talked about. They also have utilities. They have their eyes on it. So I think just generally, we're finding more success, I think, as a company doing more to build stronger partnerships with a lot of other entities that we wouldn't have normally interfaced with, but we have a shared mission on trying to figure out this problem.
Thank you. We have some more resilience related questions, but I'm going to maybe jump around to some other topics to make sure and then we can come back if we've made sure we've covered some of the other ones. And you just mentioned utilities as being one of those partners. And we got two questions really focused specifically on utilities. So the first one was when utilities implement power shutoffs during high fire weather events, do you see measurable difference in claims? I guess like are those power shutoffs actually helping reduce losses from your perspective? And if so, can insurers collaborate with utilities as utilities are working on their own wildfire mitigation plans since you have some shared exposure? That's one. And then the second one, which I think is related, is when pricing a homeowner policy, does the local utilities behavior, whether they've been doing vegetation management or hardening the grid or doing these power shutoffs, does that factor into how you're thinking about pricing and underwriting?
So other companies might be in a different place with this. I think for us, it's probably something I think that we can do more with. I think we use it qualitatively. We do have a view of where different utilities are at in terms of how we assess their processes, their equipment, their kind of readiness for extreme wind events and potentially the fires that could come from them that are caused by their equipment. So I would say that there's parts of the state that we say, at least qualitatively, we might be a bit more comfortable writing more business here because at least one of the dimensions that kind of contributes to that comfort level is utility in this area has done a really, really good job. And maybe they've undergrounded their equipment, or maybe they've done other changes, like you said, they have their power shutoffs that they're doing really well with. But I'd still say that's something that there's more room to kind of go deeper with that and to make it more of a quantitative element of how we do things. I wouldn't look at that right now and say, okay, we're pricing on that explicitly. That could be something that we do eventually. I mean, I think there's an argument for that, but that would take some more time. And I think I mentioned earlier, and you referenced it, just collaborating more with utilities to better understand what they're doing and how kind of consistent they are with those things. We'd have to do more work on something like that to really get that confident with it.
Great. Let's step back a second because we jumped over one that I think maybe is relevant here, which is several questions kind of trying to better understand the risk assessments and modeling that insurance companies do. So the first question was, have insurers started to incorporate wildfire catastrophe models? You already said at the top, yes, that's what you're using in your risk assessment. The following question is, are there any challenges with that? And then a couple related questions, which models are you using? Maybe that was a question about cat models again. Another one, yeah, which models are you using for quantification of wildfire risk? Um, yeah, maybe just say a little bit more about your modeling and what goes into those assessments.
So I think if we speak just generally about modeling, it is public knowledge that we use. The model that we use is called Verisk's AR model. That's public information, and I think that a model like that one, so it has a very, very kind of important use case for us as part of how we develop our overall rating for the state. And these models bring in a lot of information. There's a lot of science that goes into them. So for what we use them for, they're quite effective. And they help us simulate tens of thousands of different fires that can happen throughout the state and the impact that they might have. And they're really critical for that. Okay, so they're very important. Companies make changes to them, they make tweaks to them. I mentioned earlier that there are areas where we could see the models could use a little bit more of a finer view in terms of what's happening in certain communities or with certain homes. That's probably an opportunity I think that a lot of companies out there see, a lot of stakeholders see is wildfire is such a precise, specific problem where having a really fine grain or precise view is really helpful. So I think a lot of people are working on how do you get more and more granular with your understanding of things. And no model is going to be perfect, but if I was to look at any cat model that's out there or any tool that's out there, you could probably make an argument that getting more specific, more real time, more granular would make them more accurate. I think that will always be true. So that is probably the biggest limitation with them. It's a lot better than nothing, though. Way, way better. So I think for us, it's just a continuing effort to try to bring in our own knowledge, our own intelligence, layer it into those things to a place where, as we meet with communities or homeowners and see what they're doing, we have a more and more accurate view of what's really happening in closer to a real-time view. If they cleared out the fuels, made some changes in the last year, how do we get closer and closer to seeing that those things have happened so that we can credit them for that? And conversely, if they did that 5 years ago and maybe we're using a map that's stale in that area, but today everything's grown back and they haven't maintained it, we would want to see that as well because that obviously increases the risk profile of the community somewhat. So getting more of that real-time view is really important.
That's great. Let's double click on two things. One that is directly relevant to what you were just saying. So if you want to add on anything that just came from the Q&A is, does Mercury use NatCat models to simulate the effectiveness of mitigation standards? And then how would those model projections affect your decisions? You were just speaking a
We
little bit to that. Do you want to say, yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
we do, and I think that there's still, in my mind, more work that can be done with the models to help. And this is more work that we do internally to help kind of rationalize exactly how mitigation impacts things. And it's not so much on an individual property level. It's when you start getting into how exactly will a fire move through a community where you have a potential for an urban conflagration. And how will different mitigation actions that happen within that community affect the spread and the severity or the intensity of the fire? And that's where I think you see there's some academics and some teams that have done some more interesting work on that recently, where they're really trying to model on a very specific granular level how fire will move through a community. That's something I think that is an area that we're doing a lot more work to make sure that we're baking that in, so that if a community has done a certain set of things, let's say in this section of a community, how might it stop the fire there? How's it going to spread? That's still something I think that there's a lot more work to be done to really bake that into our view. It's something that I think we understand qualitatively. It's something that we can ultimately bake into our community discounts. But when you really want to get very specific and like very precise on, okay, we ran hundreds of simulations on this one community on how the fire is likely to move through the community. And then you have a whole slate of different mitigation actions that can be taken, and you can look at how they affect how the fire moves. That's still something I think that we need to do more work on as a company. Again, other companies may feel more comfortable with their view on that. I think for us, looking at what's out there today, we feel like there's more that can be done on that front.
Great. Okay, one more double click on these kind of modeling questions. And we have two questions. One was entered beforehand, and I see one's in the Q&A about forest and fuel reduction and fuel treatment. So one is, what forest and fuel reduction metrics do insurance companies consider when they're assessing their risk or their premium discounts? And the other one is, how important are community level forestry mitigation actions in the way you set premiums?
So that's an area I would say when you're looking at the mapping, it may or may not pick those things up if the work is very localized to that community. So an example that I'll give you, which is a bit of a segue to an investment we made recently, or into a partnership. But when we went to visit Lake Tahoe, and you could go to a part of Lake Tahoe to see where they had done some local fuel clearances, and it's 132 feet wide, the work that they did there, which is, I guess it's called, it's a two chains and a chain is 66 feet. That the work that is that specific to that community, we're not talking about very, very large amounts of areas that have been cleared out. You're not likely to see what some of the tools we have at our fingertips today. You're not likely to see 132 feet of clearance around a community. Even if you've done a lot of great work with that, that may not always get picked up. And that's part of why right now we have things like our community discounts that we can find out those things have happened, we can understand them better. We can use that to bring in some discounts and apply them to that community to recognize that work. But again, looking at those models and the current state of the models, I think it's our view that we can probably do more to try to bake those things in in a way that's more scalable for the entire state. And our partnership with BurnBot, which is a company, it's actually the company that did that field clearance in Lake Tahoe. It's to one of the kind of things we're hoping to pursue with them on that front, in addition to just supporting the work that they're doing on fuel reduction generally throughout the state and in other states, is how can we improve our views, our modeling to pick up that kind of work and understand the impact it has on the expected losses or risk to the community? Can we take that field clearance of 132 feet around that community and what can we model on the impact of the community from that? And there are different models out there that try to do this right now. Again, I'm not sure how prevalent some of those models are within the insurance industry. They're things that we've looked at. But those are things that we want to assess a little bit better. And I think building those partnerships with groups like Burnbot that specialize in actually doing the field clearing work, let's understand their analytics. Let's understand how we can work with them to kind of reconcile that with how we look at things. And we'll probably learn from that and get a better view over time. So that I would say is a work in progress, at least for Mercury.
Okay, we're going to do a hard pivot, but related, you mentioned an investment in BurnBot. We got a question that said, would Mercury commit to not investing in fossil fuel projects?
So with our investments, I think people generally understand insurance companies with a lot of the premiums that we collect as we hold on to them and we're paying out claims. Part of what we do with the money is we invest it to earn some investment income. It helps us ensure that we have the solvency that we need to have to pay claims. And what we do with that money, we invest it in a variety of things. Different companies have different strategies, different approaches with it. We don't have some formal guidance or stance on fossil fuels with those investments. I will share that I think they're under 1% of our investments, so they're not material at Mercury. I think for us, what's more interesting as we think about money that we can invest, whether it's in bonds or equities or whatever it is, I think over time it will be increasingly interesting to think about channeling some of those investments, as we did with BurnBot, into spaces that we can see directly reducing and impacting the risk that homeowners face or communities face when you look at things like wildfire. So I think you can go down a certain path with, do you invest in natural gas or oil or whatever it is as part of your investment stack? Or I think what it might be a bigger opportunity is, how do you increase the investment in solutions that you believe will materially reduce the risk that your customers, your communities at large just face in states like California from wildfire. And I think that that's a more interesting, I think, evolution that we're going to see hopefully over time, more and more interest in investment in those kinds of things. It kind of makes sense when you think about it. I mean, if you're thinking about it as an insurance company, again, you're trying to ensure that you have solvency, that you can pay claims, that you're healthy financially, and you can invest in a municipal bond, which pays 4.5 or 5%, and that makes sense. But you could also invest in other things that perhaps are more speculative. They may not be as liquid, but it could impact the losses that your customers are facing, and that reduces the risk you face as a company as well. That's kind of a win for everybody. So over time, I think that becomes a more interesting area to think about how investments may evolve as we talk about this space.
Great. Okay, we're now going to shift away from the investments. Um, Question that was sent in ahead of time. How often have policyholders hit the limit on their ALE coverage, so additional living expenses? Maybe start by explaining for people what that is. And is there interest in extending coverage?
Extending coverage. I
I'm
don't know if
not
that
sure
would
if they're interested in whether there's consumer demand to buy more
to
additional
buy
living,
more.
or if Mercury
Okay.
offers extended additional living. Um, it's unclear. Take it where you want.
Okay, so I can't answer this for the LA fires because they're too recent. So when you look at ALE, and if the question is, okay, how often are people in the past like using up all their ALE? I think that's the question, and we can talk about fire specifically. I know from us looking at some of this in the past, when we look at fires and we look at ALE, so Mercury, a lot of our customers had bought 50% of coverage A for ALE, meaning that if you have the way that the coverages work with homeowners insurance, you have your coverage A, which is basically replace the main structure. You have a certain amount of limit for that, and then your additional coverages, B, C, and D, other structures, contents, ALE, tend to be a percentage of A. It's just for some reason the way the United States does homeowners insurance. If you go to Europe, they don't do it that way where you have this percentage of A is the amount you use for other coverages like ALE. So 50% is pretty common historically for customers at Mercury. I think that's probably higher than the average for the industry. I know some companies go as low as 20%, but at 50%, when we've looked at where a lot of our homeowners have ended up when they've had fire claims, and these aren't older claims because it takes a while to use up your ALE. So you're not going to look at recent fires. On older fires, it's a fairly small percentage that have used up all their ALE. It's single digit percentage. It might actually be below 1%. Now it's something in terms of extending it. I don't know if that's saying is there demand for offering more of that, going above 50%. Um, I I think right now where we're at 50%, I believe is the highest option that we have. We have lower options. Actually, I think that's become more popular lately with people looking to save on their insurance. I think that's something people have to work out with their agents on what's the right level for them. But at this time, I don't think we're looking at offering more than what we offer in terms of the ALE percentages.
Okay, several questions came in about the state of insurance in California. Um, High level ones. What trends do you see in California's homeowners insurance market over the next 10 years? Maybe related, do you expect the insurance crisis to end in 2027?
Okay, well, 10 years is a long time. And I think with the crisis, it kind of depends on what you define or what you label as a crisis, meaning I think over the next few years, because of the reforms the CDI is making, the California Department of Insurance is making, you will see more companies, admitted insurance carriers, your household names coming back to California in a bigger way, starting to write policies, starting to open up in more parts of the state. I know for Mercury that's been true. We've opened up more several times over the past year in anticipation of the changes that have been coming. Our changes effective in July. I think there are a lot of companies that will be further into the future with their changes as well. So I think that there will be more household names offering insurance in more areas than there have been in the past few years. Uh, that said, if we're talking about a crisis, what you mean by crisis, I think that you're going to start to see people have more choices, but in some of these higher risk areas, especially if the homes haven't been retrofitted or mitigated, the prices will be at a level that I think will still, I would say, would lead people to say there's still a crisis because you go from having an availability crisis to maybe an affordability crisis. Right today, you probably have both. But you may be able to address the availability issue. Now you can choose from half a dozen insurance companies that you recognize in your community, but perhaps the premiums are at a level that is much higher than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And I think there's so many different solutions that have been floated to try to help address that. And you have everything from state-run insurance to a state-backed reinsurance plan. There's some things I know the utilities have tossed out. There's things tossed out with the fair plan and bolstering that. But there's even certain people who are running in November who I think have floated some other ideas. I think the reality here is you're not going to solve the affordability problem in a real sustainable way until the risk itself reduces because it ultimately comes down to what's the risk and if that keeps increasing or if it's even staying where it is right now. In many areas the expected cost is very high, so the price for insurance will be very high. You have to make changes that to the risk itself through retrofitting, through mitigation. That to us has always been the really the only and the best path out of the challenges that we're facing. That's going to take time. There's probably millions of homes in California that need to be retrofitted. So it's not going to happen that quickly. And for us, a lot of our challenge internally is figuring out how can we play a bigger role in helping to accelerate that somehow? And one of the ways that we feel we're doing that is by offering heavier incentives. heavy discounts. We hope that that kind of gets more people to look at that and say, okay, you know what, that's worthwhile. Or if we see homes like we visited a community recently a couple weeks ago, the underlying risk in the area is very high, but there's a handful of homes that have done amazing work. They've gone very far with mitigation, but they're still paying a lot from an insurance standpoint, a lot more than we think they should pay. So if we can offer our product to some of those homes, it resonates with them. They get a significant savings there. They tell their neighbors about that, and maybe it kind of encourages more people to make that investment. And over time, the community really starts to move in the right direction. And we've played a small but helpful role in supporting that. So when I think about crisis, I don't think it would end in 27, unfortunately, because the crisis in my mind is tied to the risk being very significant, and that has to change, not through financial tricks or moving things around. It's really just about changing the risk itself, which is what the built environment.
Okay, I'm going to now pivot to a couple other questions that have come in. I want to say for everyone listening that this is not a place to get specific questions answered about your claims or your very specific mitigation investments with particular technologies. You'll need to take those to your insurance agent. But bigger, higher level questions for everyone. Let's start with a couple around law and ordinance coverage and upgrades. So for maybe Victor, you can help explain this better than me, but it's required in California that your standard insurance policy come with law and ordinance coverage, which pays to upgrade your home during rebuilding if building codes have been upgraded. Is that an accurate covering
Yep.
summary?
Yes.
Okay. So some questions on, and this might be getting pretty specific. There's confusion over the code standards, like which ones apply at which point and what cost categories, including things like solar. Maybe this also has to do with the governor's executive order rolling back some codes, what the standards are for total loss rebuilds, um, and what documentation to get the ordinance and law coverage. Um, I mean, policyholders are hearing inconsistent guidance from adjusters and supervisors around that. Is there a standard that can be used here? So anything in the broad space of these kind of code rebuilding questions.
I mean, I don't know if I have a good answer for that beyond saying, well, this might be a bit dangerous for me to do this in terms of opening a door, but I guess I would say I can't speak for what's happening as people have their interactions with adjusters, or their insurance agents. But if they're with Mercury and they're running into issues here where there's confusing language around what should happen on my claim as I rebuild or look to rebuild and what laws or ordinances apply and what does that mean for my rebuild costs, and they're having a hard time getting a clear answer on that with their adjuster, and that adjuster's at Mercury, like they're a Mercury customer. I would also say they could reach out to me and then I can help get that addressed through our claims team. I mean, I probably should have like a generic claims email that they could reach out to, but I although I'm here to answer questions and I probably can't get into specific issues on people's individual claims, I could always just try to, I mean, again, this might be a little bit challenging, but I could always try to make my own email available to people if they're really stuck on something and they want to escalate something. I mean, I do get customer escalations now and then, and I send them to our team and we work through them and see what's going on. So if something's happened with a Mercury one, I can probably help address that. But at the same time, I don't know that I can answer that right here because I don't know enough about what's happening.
That's fair, and that might apply to a couple other questions, which are about the long time frame it's taking to rebuild in LA, and then what that means for survivors. And that touches on so many things why it's taking so long there. One of it comes back to the additional living expenses when people are out of their homes for really long periods of time. Um, Another question that has come in is also around the smoke damage, which has been really tricky from so many perspectives. Um, any thoughts on those two issues?
Yeah, the smoke one's been a challenging one. I would say because we're going to get into specific claims that people have, and I'm sure there's people asking questions in the chat on their actual claim with Mercury. Uh, it what I would say to them, but I'm not making any promises with this. I mean, I'm happy to provide my email here if they want to provide if they really want to reach out to me. But again, I'm not making any guarantees on something like that. I mean, I stand by how our claims team has been handling things. I think I've said publicly before that if there was one thing, one of the lessons we have from the fires because of the scale of them is early on in the fires, if this was to happen again, we'd want to find ways to, and we do have this now, we've grown our teams significantly over time. I think we're better prepared for the inflow of claims that we would have in terms of getting back to people not having claims move around as much. But if there's still issues people have now, then it might be something that is very specific to their claim. And I can't really address those things here. So I know that's not what people want to hear, but that's the reality of it.
Yeah, a question coming in sort of about this, but relating also earlier to the resilience stuff is how oh yeah, can Mercury provide the detailed guidance on hardening someone's home? So this person's saying they are aware of the basics, but what exactly do they need to do for which exact discounts? So where do you have thoughts on where people should go for sort of like property level advice on what to do with an eye towards having a better
Yeah.
insurance outcome? Yeah.
Yeah, our website has and I don't know if I have an ability to like paste something into the chat, but our website has a guide on what people can do for different discounts and different levels.
That was another
I don't
question was if they could find that on your website. We can also share that out with everyone afterwards. Oh, I think that worked. You put it in. Great.
I put it there, but I don't think it goes to everyone. I don't, oh, I see how to use this right there. But if you want to learn more about how to attain different discounts that we have available, you can take a look at that and hopefully that provides you the information you need. If it doesn't, you could check with your agent. If you're still looking for more, I guess you could always, again, try reaching out to me directly, but I may not be the best option for that. But I do try to make myself available to people who are looking for additional help with things.
Great. And that would answer this question of whether there are discounts for Firewise.
There are. We do have a discount for Firewise. It's not as significant as our main community discount I was referencing earlier, because Firewise is something that, while it's meaningful, we're really looking for things that we can verify that have actually changed on the ground, that change the physical risk that the community is exposed to. I look at Firewise still more as a sign that the community is getting engaged, it's organized, it's working through different things. But we ultimately want to look at things that we can really validate as materially changing the risk in the community. And you have to be able to see it. You have to see physical changes to the risk.
Great. More questions about ALE. I think one of the challenges, this is not exactly a question, but something that I see a lot that I think is related is like ALE is getting used up quickly, especially in a fire like LA. It's maybe you could say more about this. Is the recovery time in LA a lot? I think you mentioned longer than other fires, so there might be some very unique challenges happening in LA right now. I'm asking that as a question. Um, but we've also seen proposals. This gets back to questions that were submitted in advance about policy proposals in California to extend coverages like that so that people have more when they go to rebuild. That, of course, costs more in premium. So that feels like a tension there between kind of these better resources for recovery and affordability. Any other thoughts on that?
I think with LA, one of the things that was more pronounced with it was the reaction locally in the cost of finding alternative housing after the fires. I think there's a few things with LA that have been a little bit different from some of the other fires you've seen in terms of you could say that the surge or the demand and the pricing that's kind of accompanied it. I, I don't know exactly. I mean, I haven't looked at this side by side, but I don't feel from the fires that we've gone through in the past where we've seen something equivalent to that. All that said, we have seen, I mean, with other fires, we've seen it take 5 or 6 years for everything to be fully resolved. So I obviously don't know where LA is going to end up on that because it's still too recent to know when and how it ends exactly. But for it to take years to get things rebuilt or for people to decide what they're going to do ultimately and for things to be closed or settled, that on its own is not unusual for wildfires.
Okay, several things that came in ahead of time, and also I'm seeing a couple in the Q&A now. Around kind of paying for the loss reduction that needs to be done. I can't find it now, but there was an interesting question that was about kind of how to break this cycle where, oh, here, how do we break this cycle where homeowners are hesitant to spend the money because they don't know how much it will change their premiums, what kind of discount, but also, you can't really know those things until you've done them. And then related are some questions on, do insurance companies ever invest in home hardening directly? Are there other venues like maybe the coin program in the state, or lower cost financing tools, like other types of incentives that could be coupled here to drive more of that loss reduction investment?
So I think those things are possible. And if, as we think about more generally how the state or government can play a bigger role in this, it's probably in that realm. I mean, there's some bills floating around that would formalize some more financing or investment mechanisms that would help homeowners get access to low interest financing or other grants that would help them do the work. I think if we're going to look at insurance companies funding some of that, it's something that I think we would look at that we're evaluating, and it's something we've been talking about for a little bit of time now. How could something like that work? In some ways, it's a bit harder just initially for an insurance company to do something like that when you think about it, because for us, we wanted to be more aggressive with um, making the discounts fairly steep. Because there's different ways. So if you're looking at something like wildfire and you have an expected loss and you have certain things you know that can reduce the risk significantly, you can handle that in a variety of ways. The way that we chose to handle it was we tried to go really heavy on saying if we have this expected loss reduction, let's give all of that back and maybe then some in the form of heavy discounts. You could alternatively say we may not go as far with that, but with some of the money that we're kind of keeping, we're gonna move it into financing or grants or something like that. I think there's different approaches different companies can take with this. We chose for the time being to go much heavier on the discounts because it felt more straightforward. It felt just clear and simple. And it was just something where if you've done it, you get the discount. If you've already done it with your house, you get the discount. Like it's just in some ways it's simpler and over time it may age better. All that said, I think going back to how we can invest more generally in things like partnering with companies like BurnBot or whatever it is, I do think there's something there here that we want to figure out over time. And it's something we probably want to work with government or other stakeholders on, or like how can we play a more productive role in helping to accelerate the work being done. And don't really have a good answer on that right now. We've looked at a lot of different ideas, and I think some of them will take shape over time, but it's probably still too early for us to say this is exactly how it could work. I will say that we've talked to some communities that have said, will you will you pay for all the homes in the community to have X, Y, and Z done? We'll do assessments, pay for them to have assessments, pay for them to retrofit all these different things. That's challenging for an insurance company for a few reasons. Like one is our margins are already pretty thin as it is. If you look at our profitability in a state like California over 10 years, most years we've lost money in California for homeowners. Even in years where we didn't have any fires, we were losing money. So you're starting from kind of a tough spot. And I do think things are getting better with the reforms the department has made. We can now include costs of reinsurance, which are really significant for us. So if that's now in our pricing, then we have a clearer path to be profitable. That will give us more flexibility, but it doesn't really change the fact that we're trying to price our product in a way where there's a thin amount of profit because we want to try to be competitive and make sure that we're sensitive to how affordability is an issue. So a bit challenging for us to just dip into a pool and say we're going to pay for all these homes to do all this work. And that assumes that we would insure all the homes, which is another challenge. Is it gets more complicated when you're dealing with that kind of a situation where you're retrofitting a lot of homes that will not be your customer. And you're not going to have like a 5 or 10 year window where you hope over time that you're able to kind of make that money back up somehow in the form of kind of like a loan or again, a low interest financing. So that's a bit challenging. That's again where I think government has some interesting ideas on how they can play that role. We've seen utilities do some work there as well. A little bit easier for them in that they're a monopoly and everyone is their customer. So they're going to go into an area and pay for ember resistant vents across all these homes. Those people will be ratepayers for a very long time because they're with that utility no matter what. With insurance companies, consumer choice is obviously important, so people are moving around. So it's a little bit harder. But the shorter answer is I think there's more that can be done. It's something that we're working on, and hopefully over the next 6 months to a year, we have some things that we can test that will help on that front.
Great. Okay, we only have 5 minutes left. A couple super quick things. There's something in the Q&A that says 50 feet of clearance around homes in urban settings is impractical, but I don't think I heard you ever say you need 50 feet to insure a home, right? Could you
No,
clarify?
you don't need to do that. Not in our minds. I'm pasting something in because I know there's a lot of claims questions. So that's an email address people can use to escalate things as well. If they'd like to get some more help or support to understand what's happening with their claim, they can send to that email address and hopefully we can support them. 50 feet for us is not something that we look at. We're really focused quite quite narrowly almost, I would say, on that 0 to 5. And you could go a little bit further out from that, but we would agree. I mean, if you're looking at 50 feet, I don't know many places in the built environment in California where you can go more than 15 or 20 feet without running into your neighbor. I mean, in my neighborhood, I it's probably 10 feet, maybe 5 feet, depending on where my lot kind of ends on the corners. And I think that's normal. So we want to try to focus on one, what we think matters in terms of where the risk is, which is really in that zone zero, and it's where as things ignite, they're likely to ignite the structure. But it's also practically speaking, I think where you just have to focus things because it's what people can control. You're obviously not going to have someone go to their neighbor like 3 homes down and say, can you do something about that? I mean, it is how fire moves, but you have to be somewhat pragmatic with this too. Yes, urban conflagration is a huge problem, and what your neighbors do matters, but you can't, I don't think you can take such a strong stance with that you preclude people from having discounts or benefits from doing what they can within their own parcel. I think you have to err on maybe giving a little bit more credit on that because if you don't provide that, then I don't know what solution you're ultimately giving people on how they can get out of this beyond saying, all of you have to do this, and when you've done it, come back and talk to us. That might be true on some level, but it's better in our eyes to give people a path to get there house by house, even.
Okay, one last question is how can people get information on increases in annual policy premiums in order to budget?
Well, at least for Mercury, and this is true with several insurance companies, we work through independent agents. And your agent is your advocate to help you navigate something like that. So they can help you understand where things are going. We do a lot of communication to agents on what's happening with our rates. They can go into the system um, and start quoting things a few months out to understand what's going to happen. So they can help you understand what's coming. They can help you look at alternatives. If let's say you're with Mercury, it's no longer a fit, given how the rates are changing, you want to look at other carriers, your independent agent can help you do that. And I think when you're in a market like this one, it's important to look at independent agents in my mind because they do have access to so many markets. I think if you're with some of the carriers where you have exclusive agents, sometimes their options may be more limited. I'm not trying to knock them, but it's an unfortunate pitfall or problem that we face when you have the problems that we have in California.
Okay, and with that, with 1 minute left, thank you for answering all these questions with us today, Victor. Really appreciate you taking time. We will be posting this to our YouTube page. I'll also share that we have a couple other upcoming webinars that might be of interest focused. On July 10th, we have one on making homes insurable in high fire risk areas. On July 14th, we'll have our next session in Research to Practice on improving disaster insurance access and experience with one of our researchers. So we hope you can join us for those. And thank you so much for your attending and for Victor's time today. Thank you.